In April of this year, there were two papers published in the journal Nature, one by Miles Allen and others, the other by Malte Meinshausen and others. And they calculated how much carbon dioxide we can produce at any point between now and 2500. In other words, in the next 500 years, or 400 years, well, no, 500 years, the next 500 years, without breaching that all-important 2 degrees level. And what a previous paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by Susan Solomon and others in February this year had already shown that an accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is of equal power at any point between now and the year 3000. In other words, at any point in the next 1,000 years, any ton of carbon dioxide produced in the atmosphere will effectively stay there. And she showed that this was the case as a result of changes in deep ocean circulation, which means that decarbonised water no longer comes to the surface after a certain degree of warming. So once you've produced that carbon dioxide, unless you have some incredibly expensive method of air capture or something like this to remove it from the atmosphere, once it's already there, it is there effectively forever. Forever as far as our purposes are concerned, the next 1,000 years at least. And once you have reached a certain global temperature, the Solomon paper also showed, that temperature is there forever. You don't come down from it. The whole idea that governments have proposed in the past of overshooting the desired target and then coming down to reduce the concentrations in the atmosphere, reduce global temperatures later on, is a fiction. As the Solomon paper shows, it can't apply. And so what the Allen and Meinshausen papers did was to say, right, given that you're basically stuck with it once you've produced it, how much at any time can we produce between now and forever? How much carbon dioxide can we produce without breaching that key 2 degrees limit? And what they were trying to make us focus on was the cumulative emissions in the atmosphere. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what counts where climate change is concerned. It's not a percentage cut against a particular level we might have had in 1990. It's not the rate of production in any one year. It is a total amount of carbon dioxide which goes into the atmosphere, and as these papers show, between now and forever. And they showed that the cumulative amount, when you do a few simple sums, which I did from taking figures from the World Energy Council, is the equivalent to the carbon dioxide, the carbon stored in 60% of current reserves of oil, gas, and coal. Now, a reserve is not the same as a resource. Let me just clarify this for you, that all the minerals in the world's crust, or all of any particular kind of mineral, whether it be coal or whether it be niobium or whether it be lithium, whatever it might be, the total in the world's crust is called the resource. That's the total amount that there might ever be in the world that was put there with the Big Bang. That's a resource. The fraction of that resource which has been identified, mapped out, can be extracted at a reasonable cost, and where the technology exists to extract it, in other words, that fraction of the resource which is good to go, that's called the reserve. And in most cases, the reserve is just a small part of the resource for the great majority of minerals. Not so much for oil, but certainly for coal. The reserve tends to be just a very small part of the total resource. And so what these two papers were showing is that of the oil, coal and gas which is good to go, which is ready right now to be exploited and for which we already have plans for exploitation, we can use only 60% of that total without breaching 2 degrees, 60% ever. So if governments are serious about climate change, and this is why I contend that they are not, they would be putting together proposals here at Copenhagen this week to determine which part of current reserves were going to be left in the ground. If 60% is the absolute maximum, perhaps 40% the safe limit, they should be deciding which 40 or 60% should be left there. Moreover, they would also be proposing, as a simple matter of logical and rational policy emerging from scientific findings, they would also be proposing a total global moratorium on all prospecting for new reserves of coal, oil and gas. Now let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, that coal, oil and gas are only a small part, well only a part, of the total amount of fossil fuel. We now know that there are loads of unconventionals in the form of bitumen, the tar sands in Canada. This is truly disgusting. This is truly disgusting. And incidentally, for the Canadians in the audience, and I know that there are quite a few, almost the most effective thing anyone on earth can do at the moment is to go to the tar sands patch in Alberta and occupy that machinery. Because otherwise that's our future. That is our future, that this place gets turned into Mordor. We see this hideous black destruction taking place there, which is not just symbolic of where the world is going, but is actually going to drive the world that way by the enormous carbon emissions being produced there. But it's also the oil shales, it's the ore emulsion, there are huge quantities of so-called unconventional fossil fuels which do not figure in that calculation which says the absolute maximum is 60%. That's just 60% of coal, oil and gas. So we're talking about a small fraction of total global reserves. And I can't tell you what the fraction should be, because these governments which claim to take climate change so seriously haven't even done the calculations. I had to do the 60% calculation myself, working from World Energy Council figures, but you won't find it in any single government document because no one is talking about supply. I said with one possible exception. There is one government which appears to be putting restraints, at least from time to time, on the supply of one fossil fuel, namely petroleum or crude oil. And that government is Saudi Arabia. It's not doing so because it's concerned about climate change. In fact, it's one of the governments doing most to undermine global action on climate change, but it's doing so because, as King Abdullah says, oil in the ground is worth more than money in the bank. And who can say he's wrong, especially given the state of money in the banks. But whenever Saudi Arabia says we're restricting the supply of oil, because of course Saudi is a great OPEC swing producer which can make a difference in the supply of oil, all the world's governments jump up and down like crazy and say you must open your taps and give us more. Oh, and by the way, we must stop climate change. Doesn't really compute. So we have no supply side policy. We have no policy to deal with cumulative emissions. We do not have any serious policies on climate change. But to come back to these wider points about fossil fuels, we've heard from Klaus how difficult, even implausible perhaps, it is to substitute our fossil fuel-based economy with a renewable-based economy. But my God, we've got to try. We've got to try, otherwise what we will see in either direction, either as a result of climate change or as a result of declining reserves of fossil fuel, what we are likely to see is a catastrophe which makes all previous human disasters look like sideshows at the circus of human suffering.